Do. It's the B.Bloomed Lovecast. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. Is that our theme song now? I got my purple V-neck shirt on. 0 F's given. Oh, we're all purpley. Very indigo children. Waiting for our homeboy Joey Mordecai to join us here on the podcast. Yeah, first thing I thought, I saw his last name, like, ooh, regular show, Cartoon Network. Love that show. Watch with your kids. You'll be entertained as well as they.
Yeah, and Adventure Time.
Oh yeah. Such good cartoon.
They are.
Well, it's like Looney Tunes back in the day, you know, like it was cartoons, but it had a lot of adult references and humor. Here's our guy. Here is Joey Mordecai joining us on the podcast. Joey.
Hello.
There he is. What's up, man?
Hello, how are you?
We're doing great. This is my wife, Kayla.
Hi.
Hi, Kayla. Nice to meet you.
You too.
So this is the first time, you know, here we are on the podcast, B.Bloomed podcast. I'm not sure what number it is. We don't number them anymore verbally because they don't always line up. But this is Joey's first time even meeting Kayla. So awkward and cool.
Yeah.
Right? Awkward. So we were kind of just chatting. So we're recording, we're live, we're rolling. We always just kind of jump in hot and just, say hi to Joey, everybody. So we were talking before you jumped on about how we get connected through Facebook. And I was posting some stuff and some of your comments and your replies and our back and forth. I was like, ooh, I think we have probably some things in common. So I reached out to you to connect, and we had a pretty awesome 2-hour conversation. Turns out we have a lot in common. But why don't you tell them a little bit about you? And I know you have a marketing, or you either work for or own a marketing agency here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, actually, I just launched a marketing agency this year, so I own it. And I mean, full disclaimer, that's my only profession. I'm not an expert in history or physics or anything like that. Just kind of a hobbyist.
Right.
But yeah, I own a marketing agency here, and one thing I want to cover real quick is my hair. I haven't had a haircut in weeks, you guys. So
you're not alone, dude.
I know.
I decided to embrace it and just go wild with it. So.
let it fly. 0 F's given.
Right. So yeah, when we connected, we were talking about a little bit about the virus pandemic going on here. And I think we were both just kind of looking for ideas and solutions to help both ourselves and people kind of get through this troubling time. And that's, I'm sure you've mentioned that's how we connected and went further from there. And you guys told me you had some questions for me. So
right. So you had basically said some things that really piqued my curiosity, because we've had experiences with our state of mind healing our bodies. And those in our audience who have followed us from the beginning, they know our personal transformation stories in terms of, what things like meditation and self-awareness did for healing the body. And there's things like you and I talked about the placebo effect. So the placebo effect is where the brain basically tells the body to be healed, and they've seen cases of this. It's not something that's not heavily documented in the medical science, right?
Right.
So you talked about these little known facts that people don't talk about in terms of the virus. You listed some things about, virus is not really a living thing. It can be created in the lab. You listed a bunch of really cool facts, and the other one was that the only way to really, for the human species to really be resilient against these kind of viruses is, you said, to integrate it into our DNA. you said something really cool about how a virus is, well, I'll let you kind of explain what you were saying there about the protein shell and how it injects the RNA, and then what integration means is something about how that process can happen, but our DNA doesn't allow it to just do any destructive damage. You want to tell us about that just a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think we're all familiar with that process. The word for it is evolution. We have to evolve around our environment, or rather within our environment, in order to advance as a species. And that's really one thing that that's really important about what separates humanity from a lot of the other species on this planet, is how advanced we are. We are an incredibly complicated species, and our immune system is, again, incredibly complicated. A lot of the mass extinctions that anthropologists have identified in history were caused by viruses, because there was just a whole ton of species and animals and flora and fauna that did not have the ability to resist viruses. So humans, we're here and we're the apex on this planet because of our ability to do that. It's both a matter of adaptation while we're still alive, and then of course evolution. The thing about evolution is that it requires, unfortunately, death and rebirth. Meanwhile, us that are alive, and currently dealing with that, we have to adapt, and our body has already evolved tons and tons of ways to do that. And the one thing, if you compare us to every other species that's here on this planet now, that separates us, is our mind, our brain power. It's phenomenal in comparison to any other species that's ever evolved here or ever lived on this planet. And it's one thing I think that is really being underestimated in modern times, especially when it comes to things like pandemics and that sort of thing. We turn to doctors and science and that sort of thing, but we're not turning inward, and we're not focusing on what we can do within ourselves to solve these issues. I would never say that something like meditation is like some magic fix-all, some magic cure-all, but it is most definitely the pinnacle of human capability. Everything we do is led by our thought processes, and you can't just depend on medications and science and things like that. You have to definitely be able to get your mind in a state where your body can use those tools, and that's where meditation comes in.
That's so, yeah. I was just so enjoying listening to you talk about that, because it's and well said and well articulated. See, in our whole spiel is there's this whole mind-body complex, right? And if you're just focused on the body and the physical and the observable, you're missing the whole other half of being, if not more than half of being, right? Because what's more real? We talked about this. Do you interact with the atoms? Technically, yes. But what's more real, the atoms or your subjective relationship to the object, right? Your subjective mental perceptions of the object, not just the physical object itself, right? So they're actually shown scientifically that relationship to object precedes the object in our thought process.
Right.
They say that it would take too long to say object and then relationship.
Right.
So
right, because we're so dependent on our senses and how we're perceiving any sort of object, and all of that happens within the brain. It's been shown that color doesn't really exist. Our brain creates it in order to organize the wave patterns we're observing. Same thing with sound, and virtually everything in this universe, if you look deeply into it, is a matter of waves and wave patterns, and our mind is just interpreting these, and so the question is it's like the chicken before the egg. Is the object there before we perceive it, or do we perceive it and then the object is there?
Right. And what you're really tapping into is really where our knowledge kind of we bump up against that, and that's as far as our knowledge can really go, right? So we can speculate about that all day long. It's really cool to think about, but most people don't really need to think about, does the object appear first or not? Because what people care about the most, I think, is how do they take things like meditation and yoga and mindfulness and make it really tractionable in their life. And what I like to say is, okay, we can have, like, people like you and I, we can rap about, does the object exist before you look at it or not, right? And that's fun. And that's for a very specific audience. But I think most people in general is like, okay, can we cut to the chase in terms of how it helps in my day-to-day life? Not that you're not cutting to the chase, but I'm kind of trying to take the conversation into a place of where the mind. Okay, you said the five senses, right? We're so reliant on the five senses.
Right.
But what is the sixth sense that ties it all together? Well, in Buddhism, it's the mind. So the mind is the sixth sense. So it's the six consciousnesses. You have mouth consciousness, nose consciousness, eye consciousness, touch consciousness. Did I say hearing yet?
Yeah.
Ear consciousness, and then you have mind consciousness.
Right.
And so they basically call the mind the sixth sense. So can you imagine, this fundamental sixth sense and not developing it? It'd be like walking around having underdeveloped hearing or sight, or it's going to radically alter your perception of reality. So that is kind of like kind of a philosophical thought experiment to say, yeah, the mind really is like a sense, and if you don't have a decent relationship with the mind, it's like not having a decent relationship with like taste or touch or sound or sight, right? So if you have a bad relationship with taste, here's an example. People who have they get really addicted to eating, their taste buds, you have this improper relationship with food that has to have a certain taste to kind of excite the mind, the brain in a certain way. But if you can train your taste buds to actually not have to douse things in ranch or cover things completely in salt and seasoning and actually taste the food, I'm not saying anything bad about people who do this. I'm just saying this is an example about how you can think of the mind in terms of a sense. Because you have a bad relationship with taste, it's going to create this addiction in the mind because you haven't developed the relationship with taste to actually taste the carrot and not need to cover it in ranch or whatever.
Right. I love that you're sort of putting the mind as a kind of a sense in its own, because something that's interesting that they found with neuroscience is that our brain actually processes all of our senses separately and actually organizes them in a way that is different than how it receives them chronologically.
Right.
In order to sort of make sense of it all. For example, sound. Our brain processes sound before we actually realize we're hearing. So we will react to sound before we know we're hearing sound. And
is that because of the speed of sound? Is it related to the velocity of sound?
No, actually, because light's actually faster than sound.
Okay.
The main difference is that with sound, it actually just goes right to.
Baggage?
I don't want to get I'll get my terminologies wrong. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah,
but yeah. It goes right to the spinal column, and your body reacts, and then it goes up to the brain. Whereas light, when it goes in, it bounces back and forth in the brain. And it actually takes a long time for the brain to process light. And so what your brain has to do is it has to stop processing sound and touch and smell and taste. It has to hold it while it's processing light, while that light's bouncing back and forth.
To catch up.
Exactly. And then once your brain processes the light, then it aligns them and then creates the picture of reality that we see today in front of us. This process actually takes about a half of a second. And that's where we get those sensations of like, oh, I knew that was about to happen, because it literally happened right before you were aware of it happening, and it took a second for your brain to process it.
That's interesting.
And this is one thing that's music is amazing, because it creates this this challenge where we literally have to predict that half of a second, that split second, in order to land the timing right. Some producers will even tell the musicians, try to play ahead of the beat. That way they'll be right on time.
Wow, that's so cool. And that's another thing that we realized we had in common was we're both musicians. And we didn't know that when we were talking on Facebook. And yeah, so it's so fascinating how our mind kind of, so in Buddhism, they have this concept of impermanence, right? Like nothing's permanent. So look at our consciousness. To us, it seems like our awareness is completely a continuous flow, right? To us, we're like, no, I'm aware 100% of the time, there's no break. What you just said is you just kind of supported it in neuroscientific terms, which is the brain actually chops up the different senses. And in Buddhism, they're saying that each one's a different consciousness. So actually, every time we sense a different, every time we use our sense apparatuses to sense different phenomena, it's actually kind of our consciousness is getting chopped up and interrupted constantly.
Right.
So it's actually not a continuous flow. And a lot of the monks I've listened to and worked with have said, watch what happens when you go from hearing to feeling, or from feeling to seeing, or like it's actually, you can't notice it, but it is broken up. It's not permanent. It's not permanently a continuous, unbroken chain flow of consciousness.
Right, and I think that's why for like meditation and even you might even say other forms of exercise, why it can be so important to isolate. Because then I mean, this is mostly opinion, but I think maybe it's because you're cutting out some of those processes that your brain is constantly doing, of sorting out time and events. And so if you get rid of sound, you get rid of taste, you get rid of smell, then you're just left with, or even you get rid of light, you close your eyes, you go into the darkness, you're just left with what maybe you're feeling physically in your body. And some scientists have actually even claimed to have discovered multiple senses, 10, 12, 15, even I've even read articles that say up to 21 different senses.
Whoa, like what does that look like compared to the classic 5 or 6 that we're aware of?
Honestly, it was a little much for me to kind of wrap my brain around.
Okay.
But they talk about the one that was talking about 21 different senses. It was talking about various senses that we have in our eyelids, that we have on some of the membranes, like behind our ears and things like that sense certain other things. And one thing that's fascinating,
it sounds like more subtle versions of the primary senses.
That's kind of how I was looking at it. Yeah. And I mean, but at the same time, you could say that about anything. You could say that your sense of taste is just a type of touch.
Sure.
You could easily say your sense of hearing is a type of touch, because the sound waves have to touch.
They're touching and vibrating things. Sure.
Right. But what it comes down to is the different ways that your brain processes it.
So, Kayla, I want to bring your voice into the space.
Yes, please.
In terms of like meditation and what we're kind of talking about here, can you share with us how, like what Joey was just talking about in terms of what happens to the senses when we sit down and we sit peacefully and quietly? What's your wisdom or experience with sitting and dealing with the senses as you're meditating? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you're not in a dark space with no noise and things going on around you, they're going to be disruptive. But just noticing those things and then coming back to your concentration and then letting those things interrupt for a moment, but then going back within and working through those distractions.
Right. And so do you remember how we learned to deal with, what did we learn from the monks in some of our studies in terms of what do you? Cause let's say you're on the breath. Let's say you pick the breath, for example, as your meditation, your primary meditation object, right? What have we learned? Do you remember what we've learned about what do we do with distractions of the senses as they come in and take us off the breath?
You let them distract, and then you come back to the breath.
And what's the key? So I'm just gonna jump in here and just illuminate what I'm talking about, which is you turn that disruption into your new meditation object. That's how you let it interrupt. Because if you're resisting, you're creating this suffering. You're creating this non-acceptance, right? So, for example, sound, like you just mentioned, sound is a really, really key, not key, but sound is a very easily disruptive because, like you said, it almost reaches our mind before we realize it, right? So
almost absolutely does. Our body, our spinal system actually responds to sound before our brain processes it.
That's so fascinating. And what I've learned to do with sound, because sound is one of those things when you first start meditating where it's like
you hear everything.
You feel like you're a failure because you can't attenuate the reaction to the sound. When people don't know what attenuate means, it means to lower, to soften the reaction, right? You attenuate, you smooth or lower the reaction to the sound. And so what I learned to do was you use the sound as a new meditation object, and you actually notice the difference between the sound just touching your eardrum and then the mental images you make to go with the sound.
Right,
once you start, you watch the mind kind of reach out and want to like take the sound and like make it into a little daydream. You try to let go of that and just focus on the sound just vibrating your eardrums. What you'll notice is there'll be an intense vibrational feeling that almost bridges through your brain, through your skull, from ear to ear. And that way it's kind of taking you away from the mind reaching out and reacting and grabbing on to the sound and formulating some kind of a mental play about it.
Right. So, it's almost like you're putting your attention to the physical sensation of hearing sound as opposed to actually hearing sound itself.
Yeah. So in Buddhism, this is one of the 4 frames of reference of mindfulness meditation. There's mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental objects. So this would be really, you're kind of doing all of them at once sometimes, but like doing what I'm talking about, like going from the sound to just the physical sensation of the sound on the ears, it's like mindfulness of the feeling. And it's mindfulness of the mental objects, because you're also noticing the mental objects that are trying to be created in relation to the sound. So you're learning to decouple the mental object from the feeling. And the body's involved too, because the body is feeling the sensation. And then you have the mind. The mind is like, so I just described, when it comes to sound, 3 of the frames of reference. The 4th one is mind. And where the mind comes into the situation, the scenario I just described, is my mind frustrated? Am I getting frustrated right now with trying to focus the sound on the eardrums versus the object? Or is my mind content? Right? So that's where the mind part comes. So when I'm just kind of I'm kind of bringing some understanding of the Buddhist teachings of meditation to what we're talking about with the senses and the different phenomena, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, so that's that's part of my spiel on meditation. Share with us, Joey, some of your experiences in terms of, you shared with me a book you read and some techniques you studied and some of the things that you practice and how it's helped you, not just mentally, but physically. Kind of share with us how you came to get into meditation and what it's done for you. I think you also mentioned how, which we've also done, you kind of healed yourself on various levels with this practice. Please share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I kind of a brief history of me. I was raised Episcopalian, which those of you who might not know what that is, it's basically America's version of the Catholic Church, a lot more liberal though.
Okay.
And when I turned 19, I was just overwhelmed with a lot of doubt And I started exploring a lot of philosophy and a lot of science. And I made the choice to call myself an atheist. But I continued to explore philosophy and spirituality. I discovered a guy named Ken Wilber, highly recommended. I feel like he's underrated right now, but he has the integral model where he integrates philosophy and science from all around the world into kind of one master theory. I really connected with that because one thing that drew me away from religion was, it's kind of our way or the highway. I couldn't handle that,
Sure.
Yeah.
And so Ken Wilber really attracted me with integrating all these ideas. I was really into Eastern philosophy, Taoism, Kung Fu, studied a little bit of karate, which people don't necessarily think of as philosophy, but
Right.
Going through some of his reading really got me into it. It was more of probably recreational for me. I wanted to explore some of the ideas of the witness, and astral projection and lucid dreaming and that sort of thing. And more, it was just made just profoundly apparent how realistic a lot of these, religious philosophies are that are, across the world. And I don't necessarily think it's religious per se. I think religion is sort of our way of trying to understand it. So to move past that,
Sure.
I got really deep into that and discovered some things about myself I didn't know were there, and about other people that I didn't know were there. And then I started learning about the idea of it being able to heal yourself through meditation. And the first time I had attempted that, I had gotten basically the flu. I was super broke. I was uninsured. I was terrified of going to the hospital. And the flu was heavy on me. It was awful. I had the body aches. I had the stuffy noses, the running, everything you can imagine, the headaches. I was miserable. And I hit this wall of kind of this decision wall where I was like, all right, I either need to bite the bullet, go to the freaking emergency room, or I need to curl up in a ball and die, And then I started kind of thinking about, Ken Wilber's teaching on healing the body, and I was like, well, let's give it one last ditch effort. And I got, really emotionally involved in it, and I just went really determined and hard. I spent the whole day doing it, the whole freaking day. Like I was telling you when we talked, I put myself in a state of mind where I was just hyper focused on my immune system. I was reaching out to all my antibodies and all the chemicals and enzymes that are in me, and I was just like leading the army against it,
Yeah.
And I would kind of hyper focus on the areas like my throat or my head that were in pain. And of course, when you start to do that, you feel these sensations, you feel warmth, like I noticed my fever was moving from my whole body to those places I was focusing on. And I was like, oh, this is working. And I mean, I didn't have the flu the next day, I literally did it all day long. It's a very grueling process. And like I said before, it wasn't some kind of miracle cure. I mean, obviously I was drinking my fluids, I was eating plenty of, fruit and vegetables. I was, getting up and stretching and exercising. I wasn't just sitting around meditating. Meditating is kind of the pinnacle. It's getting your mind on top of it so that your body knows what to do, because your antibodies and your immune system, they don't think. They're just a chemical soup, and our brain has to kind of organize that, has to run it, And funny thing, Friday, just this weekend, so I had a couple weeks ago, I had some food poisoning. I did have to go to the hospital because the only way your body can process that is to flush it out So the more you meditate on it, the more your body flushes it out, right?
Right.
I did end up having to go to the hospital, get some anti-nausea. And Friday, I went in to fill out some paperwork and all that jazz. Came home, and on my way home, I started feeling this tingle. And I was like, oh crap, did I just pick up COVID? I'm like, dang it,
Right.
Went to the hospital, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm researching it, and I did have a lot of the symptoms. I mean, there are also symptoms you might have for an allergy, but I had the itchiness in my throat. I had massive headache developing. My ear started getting really, really sore.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I realized, okay, this is going real far, I started getting that upper respiratory tingle that you get with any respiratory infection, right? Where I breathe in and it would just get that weird tingle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, crap, this is escalating really, really fast. And I went into this phase of kind of panic mode. I was like, I'm going to talk about this on Sunday. I can't show up super sick. Like, what the heck, So after a few moments of kind of calming myself down, I was like, well, let's do what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, I had already done my meditation for the day. So maybe that's why it didn't occur to me right away, So I did. I went, first I gargled some salt water and, cleaned out my mouth and blew my nose and that sort of thing, and ate some fruit and calmed myself down, sat down and went into meditation. And this is actually something I've never experienced before. So while I was doing that, focusing on the areas that were problematic, I felt them moving. Like it literally spread over here. When I was focusing on this ear, I'd get it warmed up. The pain would start to fade. Then this ear would start to feel more pain. Of course, now I'm questioning, like, how much of this am I doing to myself? But then once I really got into that flow of meditation, where you escaped all the sensations and you're deep into it and locked in, I passed out. And it was one of those things where it's just like, I'm feeling my body slowly losing all its energy. And I just thought, I need to lay down so I don't get hurt. I laid down and immediately passed out. I woke up 20 minutes later with not a single symptom.
Woo!
Wow.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Mind blowing. Yeah. And it's not, again, it's not this miracle fix all. Yeah, I gargled water. I ate.
Is it?
I take really good care of myself.
I'm going to jump in and say it is a miracle in terms of that's prayer, like at the nth degree. Think about it. You're praying at the nth freaking degree. Like it's hyper focused, like, communicating to this quantum biological level, right? So I'm going to jump in and talk about things like the water experiment, like where Dr. Emoto had people, advanced not even advanced. I think I'm not sure it was always. I think he would actually do the blessings on the one sample of water and then put bad intentions or negative emotions into the other vial. And when they freeze them, look at the crystals. And you know this. I'm just sharing with our audience who may not know. The water that had been given the blessing and loving intentions and that positive focus energy, the crystals were like this perfectly geometrical, beautiful structure. What happened to the crystals that weren't? What happened to the crystals that had the bad emotion?
They're not beautiful.
They're like kind of amorphous, bulbous,
Yeah.
like kind of disordered crystals. And this is repeatable, something that they can show happens over and over again, not just with water, but rice and other things. But
yeah, you were saying you did your own little version at the planetarium.
Yeah, at Clark Planetarium, I did that with the cold plate, where you put the water on the cold plate and it washes away the old crystals. And you can through two, which I thought was cool. There's two microscopes there, well, magnifying glasses, I should say, and you can watch the crystals kind of start to form as the water freezes. So I just did the same thing. I can meditate, so I was like, I'm going to generate these, something you talk about with emotion. Right? I think Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this, and Greg Braden. The brain heart coherence, because the brain has an electromagnetic field, the heart has an electromagnetic field, and when you get those in coherence with your emotions, right, and your ability to imagine and visualize, you can really direct the intention within the body and outside of the body, like we're talking about the water experiment, right? And we're mostly water. So imagine when we get our water content kind of all beautiful and oriented, what that does to our tissues and then our bones, right? And think about atoms. Atoms are arranged in these geometrical structures. So what I'm saying is when you get the geometry right, you kind of get the good vibes going, and you powerfully direct that intention to the body, you're basically actively engaging the placebo effect, in my naive opinion, right? But also you talked about this healing aspect, right? And the sensations that are created, and you're creating sensations that almost send a signal to start healing. This, I can't remember where I heard this. Coolest thing ever, and it directly has to do with this. Pain, I can't remember if it's been proven or if it's a theory, but think about what pain is. When you get cut, the pain, it forces all your attention to that area.
Right.
And therefore starts the healing process.
Right.
So if we can actively bring the awareness, we can all, why is that a different mechanism? You see what I'm saying? It's like you feel the pain kind of helps bring all that awareness to that area, and the body starts to heal itself. I mean, a cut can heal itself, depending on how deep it is, obviously. But even with assistance of stitches, the body can heal itself. Because there's so much awareness on that area.
Yeah, it's like the body's alarm systems, just kind of telling the administrator, like, hey, something's going on over here, you know? Send in the troops.
And if we're not, like you said, like with meditation, what that does is it kind of puts that part of our awareness at the steering wheel.
Right.
It's now become the quarterback, or leading the tip of the spear, so to speak, right? Kayla, share some of the healing stories we've done in our house. Like, what are some things that we've done, we've healed with laying on of hands and intentional healing?
Well, I went to Vegas for a bachelorette party, and I wore heels multiple nights in a row, even though I had blisters. And so I had this like gnarly.
Beauty takes sacrifices, right?
I know, I did. But I came home and I had this gnarly, like,
sore,
open wound on my foot.
Right.
Like,
it was infected.
It was.
It's swollen.
Yeah, it was
and it didn't seem to be healing very quickly, or at like a normal pace, right?
Right. So I got home, and energy work and meditation, Cody was able to, like,
we did it together, though.
Yes.
How do we do it together?
Well, you
we created an environment, right? Like,
right.
We set an intention. So we kind of agreed ahead of time that I'm going to lay my hands on this area, and every time I breathe in, imagine you pulling the infection out. And every time I exhale, and she's breathing in and exhaling with me, every time I exhale, imagine the white light going into that area, and you're communicating to your body to cleanse and accelerate the healing process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing this together. So we're taking two people's electromagnetic fields of the brain and heart coherence, and we bring it into one, like, super coherence, right? I think that's how Joe Dispenza talks, but it makes sense. And what happened how did it look the next day?
Like 80% better.
Yeah, the jump in healing was just so, it was, I mean, you could sit here and be like, oh, I'll believe it when I see a research study on it, but man, sometimes your subjective experience is so powerful. It's like we couldn't have had nothing to do with that. Yeah, the body did it, but it's like our conscious awareness and intention, just like with the water experiment, just like what you're describing with your self-healing.
Right.
The mind-body connection is so inextricably intertwined. Science doesn't deny it. It just doesn't fully understand how to harness it. And they have done this with placebo experiments, like we talked about, placebo surgeries, right? Well, they'll actually fake a surgery, and the person sees a surgery happening. Let's say it's something they don't. I think the one I read about was a knee surgery. Some guy has like some kind of crazy arthritis or something, and they showed a video of a person getting surgery, and they numbed his leg, but they didn't actually do anything. They were kind of pretending like they were working down there. Surgery was over, and he recovered. He completely recovered, because the whole ritual of going to the doctor's office, and the brain is going, okay, yeah, the brain almost tells itself, the perception says you're gonna get fixed up by these people. So what that kind of shows is that if you can trick the brain to thinking, being so convinced that you're going to be healed, you can be healed without anybody intervening.
Yeah,
So,
and when science looks at it, when a doctor looks at it, of course they're going to say, oh, you know, it wasn't the meditation, your body did its thing, you know. And that's why I say, you know, that, you know, meditation and these thought processes are not some kind of miracle. It's just kind of like taking the wheel, you know. These are natural. Our immune system has evolved these abilities, you know, these whether it's electromagnetic, whether it's your antibodies or vitamin C or any of the factors involved around healing. You know, meditation is just taking the wheel. It's just kind of driving as the metaphor I use, driving the soldiers into battle, you know. And you know, right. So when we talk about this, I want to make sure anybody listening doesn't think that we're talking about some kind of miracle meditation or whatever, you know. I think my experience on Friday when I passed out, you know, I think that was kind of my body's way of identifying, you know, look, if we're going to get rid of this, everything's going to have to shut down for a second, you know. And I submitted to what my body needed, and boom, you know.
I think it is kind of a miracle, not in the traditional sense that people think of the word miracle, but in the fact that it's kind of a superpower. Like if you don't have experience with this and all of a sudden you experience it, you're like, that seems like a freaking miracle, right?
And
so
it's something that
I'm just kind of being funny when I say that it is a miracle because we're so passionate about it that it's not an actual like damn it, it kind of is magic, right? It kind of is.
And that's, you know, it's something that really separates us in the animal kingdom. You know, it is our ability to focus. You know, we biologists are constantly identifying that we have a very unique ability to kind of hijack our limbic system, to hijack our instincts and control them. Most animals don't have that ability. Maybe on like a small scale, you know, there's sometimes you see, you know, where like, a carnivore is helping out an animal that would usually be its meal or something like that. You know, there's things like that take place, but on the level that humans do there's no comparison. And that's really what makes us the apex on this planet, is our ability to identify past, future, and what's going on in the present between the two, and then actually manipulate it.
Right, I think Jordan Peterson says something like, our ability to take the chaos of potential of the future and act in the present to like materialize some kind of habitable order out of that chaos and create things that didn't exist before, right? Whether it could be something as simple as a garden. Okay, your front yard looks like crap. And where do you create that garden first? You create it in your mind first, right? And then out of that chaos, we slowly over time, we create this garden, right?
Exactly.
So to bring it kind of full circle and pin this conversation down, we were talking about integrating the DNA, integrating the virus into our DNA. And so to think about things like meditation and being really, turning inwards and not taking for granted the sixth sense, right? That a potential way to integrate a virus like COVID into our DNA is it's going to require deaths and rebirths. Now, if you believe that, people die and they're born all the time, but if you look at evolution, what's happening there? Like the species is dying and being reborn, dying and being reborn. The whole idea is that they're taking the adversity they're facing and they're adapting to it over generations, right? So people are going to die, unfortunately, but if we can really get in tune with our mental space, they've shown scientifically that meditation affects you on a DNA level. So this is something we talked about, can really pin this down from a hard science point of view. Kayla, you've heard me talk about it a million times. Do you remember? I want to bring your voice in the space some more and ask you. Do you remember how that works? What did Dr. Rhonda Patrick say about what that does, like for our biological age? Do you remember?
Well, it reduces the biological age.
Yeah, so it turns the clock back. Do you remember what the
telomeres?
Yeah, where are they located? You remember?
No.
On the ends of the
chromosome.
Right. So, and Joey, what are chromosomes? Tell people what chromosomes are.
Essentially, it's the superstructure of the DNA.
So they've shown that meditation affects you down to the chromosome level, where it expresses a gene called telomerase that when you regularly meditate, so you don't sit down and meditate once and turn back the clock 10 years, right?
To be consistent.
But you can turn back the clock 10 years. They've shown that a non-sedentary lifestyle, being conscious about your diet, and pay attention to your mental space on a regular basis through meditation. Mm-hmm. And so it can actually rebuild the ends of the chromosomes called your telomeres and make them longer. And the longer your telomeres are, the younger you are biologically. The shorter they are, the older you are biologically. So here we have a mechanism where meditation is affecting on the DNA level. So you could say that we're maybe doing some hand waving here, but I don't think it's a leap to say that, like you're talking about with using meditation to heal the body, if you contracted COVID and did the same thing, you'd be effectively be accelerating evolution to integrate that virus into your body, into your DNA.
Yeah, and that's a really that's a really gray area in biology.
Sure.
Some of the things that I've learned about DNA that are really shocking is one thing is that if your DNA is permanently changed in any one cell, the rest of your body will conform. And that's something that I don't think a lot of biologists or a lot of scientists are really paying a lot of attention to. And is that sort of an active evolution that we have? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to think about that.
I think it could be. It feels like it could be, just because the fact that we can actually, with the growing of the telomeres, we're actually kind of what do they call it? It's like quantum biology. In kind of a quantum sense, we're communicating to our genes to change, or our DNA to change. And like you said, that's going to spread out to the rest of the DNA throughout the body, right? We're kind of flexing that muscle on an evolutionary scale in a small window. And I think I was listening to this monk I love to listen to, Ajahn Brahm. He was talking about this study where they found this like abandoned mine where people were throwing like kittens, throwing them down this mine to get rid of them, thinking they were going to die, but they survived. And because it's pitch black down there, they had to learn how to survive in this pitch black environment. And over generations of these little baby kittens that are down there kind of procreating and trying to survive in this pit they couldn't get out of. I think within like 10 or 13 years, not thousands, or like 10 or 13 years, they had evolved to have bigger ears and better eyesight for seeing in the dark and hearing in the dark.
Right. Yeah. Because
so that's an example. Yeah. So that's an example of accelerated evolution. But this is an animal that can't actually get in and like interact with its consciousness like we can with things like meditation. Yeah. So to me, it seems like it's perhaps,
perhaps they are in a way, perhaps the desperation of their situation forces sort of a hyper focus or a meditation in a way, and I think that humans are just, what separates us is we have the ability to activate it deliberately. We don't necessarily have to be up against the wall to do it.
Do you ever think that animals meditate without us knowing it? Like, how many times, I can't tell you how many times we looked over my cat and gone, that cat's got to be meditating right now. It's just like,
I wouldn't be surprised.
It's sitting up, not laying down. Its eyes are closed. It's just not moving like 15, 20 minutes. Like, the cat's definitely meditating right now. I've seen ducks. We've seen ducks standing on one foot with their head turned around and tucked on their back, standing, balancing on one foot. That duck's doing yoga, y'all. That duck is meditating. So animals might meditate, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a very possible thing. Bears hibernate for over 50% of their life. I mean, how much is their mind doing during those times? You know what I mean?
You know what? The meditation is to stop the doing. So they're actually stopping the doing of the mind for an extended period of time, like this deep healing, deep state that allows them to survive that period of time where they're hibernating. And a lot of people confuse meditation with thinking about something or doing something or trying to elicit some kind of an experience.
Yeah.
When really you're supposed to be, not supposed to be, but in my preferred practice is to let go of the constant need to think and solve and predict and do, and like that constant will that's trying to, like, that will to power that Nietzsche talks about. You're kind of telling the will to power to just back off. Let me just relax. Let's shut down the PCU for a second and do a read, right?
And I think the natural version of that all animals do is sleep. I have and shout out my friend Haley Lynn. She's a sleep expert, and her and I have talked a bit about this. Sleeping is sort of like it's sort of a natural form of meditation. It's kind of like almost like a forced meditation, where our brain shuts 90% of its functions down, and we're just in that mode of the witness, and we're cleansing this and that and whatever else. So I mean, in that sense, yeah, every species of the animal that sleeps is doing that sort of meditation, in that form. And one thing I kind of want to touch on before we get too far away from it, because obviously everybody's concerned about COVID-19 and all that right now. You were talking about how we discussed the integrating of viruses into DNA and that sort of thing. I want to make sense out of that for your listeners.
Please.
Because it's an extremely complicated thing, and you're not going to find this on the news. None of the professionals are going to be talking about this, but this is fact about how viruses work. They're not a living thing. They don't procreate. They don't consume. They don't have any vital functions. They are literally just a chemical blob. And what they are is they have a protein shell. Every virus functions this way. They have a protein shell that has layers, and each layer is specific to a particular part of the cell that it has evolved to infect. And that layer slowly burrows through the cell one layer at a time. The cell will remove that layer of protein in the process because it has its own defenses. Eventually, when it gets to the center of the cell, the nucleus, what's left is just one little strand of RNA. And it deposits that RNA into the cell's DNA so that the cell will start to reproduce the virus. They don't reproduce themselves. Its victim reproduces it.
Well, it's almost kind of like it impregnates the cell with its RNA.
Right. And the crazy thing is, like I said, is it's injecting that RNA into your DNA so that the virus becomes part of your DNA. And when you consider the fact that, like I was just talking about, how your DNA throughout your whole body conforms when some of your DNA changes, that tells you a lot about how our immune system works against viruses.
So hypothetically, if you could repeat like what you just talked about with your ability to use your emotional, mental connection to the body to send that awareness, kind of like pain, kind of sends the awareness to start the healing process. You're kind of actively sending awareness to these areas. And hypothetically, if you could do that with COVID, which I know is it's hard for people to hear that, but after this whole conversation, I think it still makes sense that if we could intervene with COVID in terms of saying, with our awareness, telling ourselves to a DNA level, which they've shown that we can through meditation, we're going to combat this thing, and we're going to integrate it, and we're going to reverse our symptoms. That kind of sends a signal to your DNA to integrate it into your being, so to speak, physiology.
Yeah, and the way that the body does it.
That's a lot of gray area. I understand that's a lot of gray area, but in terms of what we've said in this conversation, I think it's not proof, but I think that it's what do you call that? It's like it's kind of a priori knowledge, I think, where it's based off of subjective experience.
Yeah, and if you know the process, then through meditation you can guide your body through the process. And the way the immune system does it with each virus is very different. For example, any form of herpes, whether it is genital or mouth, or whether it's foot, hand, and mouth disease or chicken pox, those are all forms of herpes. Our body, instead of allowing it to become part of our DNA, our body actually has to adjust how it reacts to it and isolate it. And so the DNA still has to change. It has to change to work around it. Whereas other viruses, like the cold, for example, every time you get the cold, that is permanently part of your DNA now. Every single time. And your body just has to learn to shut that RNA off and to block any future invasions.
Right.
You know, and the cold is a great example again as well, because there's bazillions of viruses that cause the cold, and the same with the flu. You know, something people need to think about when it comes to viruses is first of all, it takes billions to infect your body. You know, if you just throw 100 virus blobs on your body, your immune system's going to take care of it. It takes billions. And but it only takes one to infect a cell. And once that one gets in, that cell is going to produce another billions, and then you have the chain reaction.
So it's kind of like I said, it's kind of similar to getting someone pregnant. You have to shoot off billions of sperms so that one has a chance to make it through. It only takes one.
Right, exactly. And then
not just kind of a numbers game.
Right. And then the thing is there's natural evolution. Yes, I said viruses aren't alive. They're not, but they do have RNA, which means they do evolve. That RNA can change. The thing is look at those numbers. If one cell that's been infected produces 1 billion viruses, even if it's just 1%, that means there's millions of new versions.
Right.
So there is no one single solution to any virus, and there never will be, because they are always constantly hyper evolving. And some viruses have been identified to actually do this on a level of 60%. There's no way we can keep up with that. It's
the rate of reproducing itself in your cells or mutations?
That would be the rate of mutations.
Okay. Wow. So to kind of wrap this up, it sounds like because once the DNA changes, it kind of communicates that to the rest of the DNA in your body, right? So the only way we can combat something that, like you said, billions go in, it just takes one to infect a single cell, and then it's just kind of like spreads like wildfire, right? Well, we have a mechanism where we can intervene with our DNA, which has been I want to pin it down with the scientific finding of the telomerase and the telomeres and reversing your biological aging on your chromosomes. So we can interact at a DNA level with our with meditation, and people like you, and there's millions of people out there who've experienced healing through their own intentions, right? So it's not just the three of us. Yeah. So to me, it's like, but what it requires is that brain heart coherence, where there's an emotional. You can't just sit there and skeptically meditate.
Right.
Right.
So it's kind of similar to religion, where it requires a certain level of faith. Think about that, because this metaphysical process is relatively unknown how it works.
Yeah.
So, but you've experienced it. So your faith kind of has been strengthened. So when you do go to do this, you have an increased amount of faith that emotionally you can do it. So that's kind of where it gets kind of tricky. Is it's not like some mechanical thing that's void of emotion, or what in Buddhism is called right effort and right concentration.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure, before we finish up, that everybody understands this is a very complicated thing. It's not just a matter of meditating and then your DNA. You have your immune system has thousands of layers. First of all, you got to make sure your cells are keeping the viruses from getting in. The cells have several different layers of acids and chemicals and enzymes that prevent them and block them. You got your white blood cells that are destroying them and things like that. So it's a system. We need to make sure we're doing the basics. Eat some fruit, eat some vegetables, get some exercise, make sure you're breathing right, plenty of water. Once you have all of that under control, then meditation is going to help you actually drive that car.
I think that's perfect, and that's a great place to end, because what you just described is kind of what B.Bloomed's all about. It's a lifestyle brand. Like B.Bloomed's a lifestyle brand, and meditation by itself is not the only key, right? So it's kind of a comprehensive fitness, like you just described, because exercise buzzes it lights up your nervous system. It increases your white blood cell count, right? It affects you on a mitochondrial level, the cellular level. So you're training the cells, like you described. Diet's great. Who hasn't heard the term "you are what you eat"? Right. And then you mix meditation in there and good relationships, right? I mean, making sure your relationships are strong, because we're very social creatures. And financial, like you want to have financial. It's not about being wealthy. It's just about having. And this is kind of gets. It's not as sexy as meditation, but for some people it is. Like being really, for us, when we shifted from being young and stupid to like being really responsible, understanding how our money's coming in and how it's going out.
Living within your means.
What does that do for your stress level?
Well, I mean, it reduces tons of stress, because you're not wondering if you're going to be able to pay this bill at this time, or you
create some order in your life, right? Because even if you're like living paycheck to paycheck, or even if you have enough money, even if you bring it in more than you're putting out, but you're kind of buying impulsively, and it's kind of chaos. But if you can have a good budget and you're on a routine of exercise and you're nurturing your relationships and
all the water.
And meditation is not usually exclusive from those things, because in my opinion, meditation is a great way for us to wrestle with our own psychology, so we can be more aware of how we're shitty sometimes. So that way we can recover more quickly and have better relationships and learn when to shut up or when to speak up properly, when to pick those battles, right? So, Joey, appreciate you, man. This is so fun. What a great conversation. Plug your marketing. You had a friend who was she hypnotherapist. What'd you say? Oh, sleep therapist, right?
Sleep therapist.
Plug her and plug your marketing ad real quick before we go.
Yeah, check out Haley Lynn. She's a local sleep expert here in Utah. She's taught me a lot about lucid dreaming, and helped me kind of get back into that. I got out of it for a while. Me, I just do marketing. I own a company called Verbal Multimedia Marketing, and what's interesting that I love about marketing is in order to be an effective marketer, you have to embrace everything we just talked about.
Right.
We have to understand people's emotions. We have to understand people's thoughts. We have to understand people's health, people's dreams and desires, what makes us tick. We have to understand, the evolution of humanity that got us here and dictates our behavior, and et cetera, on and on and on. So
cool.
Yeah, that's one thing that I love about doing marketing is it kind of embraces all that is humanity, which is a great metaphor for meditation, because like I said, it's a part of us that embraces all of the complexities of human life.
That's beautiful. And where can they find Haley? Do you have a website or social media, or where can they find your friend? Sleep therapist.
Find her on my page. I talk
how do you
all the time.
How do you spell her name?
Haylee.
Last name again?
Lynn.
Okay, and what was the name of your company one more time?
It's called Verbal Multimedia Marketing. You just find a link on my Facebook page. I just got one super simple landing page. It's not going to be anything fancy. Don't be impressed. Yeah. Don't look to be impressed.
Well, we are impressed. I'm impressed with you have a lot of knowledge. Like I said, it's kind of subjective experiential knowledge, but you also have an awesome background of have done some self-study in biology and bioengineering or biotech.
Biotech. I did study biotech for a couple years in college. I didn't want to just be sitting in a lab or pushing paperwork, so that's why I decided to get into marketing instead. But one thing that's unique about me, where I did, gather all my information and knowledge is just personal study. I used to
Right.
skip high school to go read college books at the library. I've read a ton of Ken Wilber and other sources. So honestly, my recommendation to everybody out there is just read everything you can. If it overwhelms you, if you don't get it, read it again.
And what was the author you recommended for the integral model?
Oh, Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber, yes.
Ken Wilber. Kenwilbur.
BER.
Wilber. Is his name of his book Integral Models? Do you have multiple books, or is there one you recommended?
He's probably upwards of over 100 books by now. I haven't counted them all, but he's been writing since, I believe, the early 70s, maybe even before then. If I were to recommend some books of his to start on, No Boundary. That's, I think, the second book he wrote about breaking past your limits. And then another one is a personal story of his called Grace and Grit. It's about a wife of his only wife he's ever had, as far as I know, who died of cancer 2 weeks after he married her.
Oh.
And that does not spoil the story, so read it.
Oh, I'm sure it's incredible. Well, hey man, thank you so much. I have no doubt that we will continue to have an awesome friendship before we got a lot in common. As soon as this COVID stuff is kind of settled down, we got a jam.
Yeah, I'm down.
Play some music. All right, brother. Hey, thank you so much for coming on.
So nice to meet
Thanks for having me on, man.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.